Hi, welcome to the Worthy Physician Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Sapna Shah-Hawk, a board-certified internal medicine physician. Keep life simple. You are human. You are worthy. Remember what matters to you. Our goal is to help physicians remember this and to make it a reality through addressing various components of physician burnout via podcast. This is meant to be used as a tool to help guide physicians. It does not take place of professional medical help. Opinions reflected in this are my own.
So tell me, who are you? What do you do?
My name is Mitul Mehta. I'm an associate professor of ophthalmology at the Gavin Herbert Eye Institute at the University of California, Irvine. I'm a retina specialist, and I'm the fellowship director of vitreoretinal surgery.
So how far into your career are you?
This is my 8th year in practice. So I don't know if there's an endpoint to careers, but at the very least, I'm in the middle of it.
That's fair. And so before the recording, I think we were having an interesting conversation. And I think it was tied to career and how much of a person's identity does medicine comprise. And I think you had a very interesting take on that. Can you expand?
Sure. So my opinion about how much of your identity should be associated with medicine is that it's a personal decision, and you need to decide that. And it can change. It doesn't have to be fixed in stone. You can decide when you're going into medicine that this is everything to you, and medicine is who you are, and it's very integral to your personality and to who you are. But as you get older, you may want to change that. It can increase or decrease. It doesn't really matter. We were talking about my father. He was a rheumatologist, and he's been in practice for well over 40 years. He started solo a long time ago and slowly over time added partners to his group. And at the very beginning, as an immigrant to this country, he didn't have the opportunity or the privilege to decide to go into medicine because he loved medicine. He was in a situation where he wanted to be an engineer, but when he went to college, his friends who were in engineering weren't getting jobs. And the most stable profession in India at the time was in medicine. And he's a very smart guy, and he studied hard. And so he got into medical school. And that was a big deal in his family. They wanted him to come home and stop wasting their money because he was the youngest of 7 kids, and they couldn't afford to send most of them to college. My dad was kind of the last great hope for his family. And he said that this was the best opportunity to provide for his family. So then he went into medicine. And then he did that. Then he made his way to the United States, and he picked his field of medicine not because what he wanted to do, but because as an immigrant, you can't necessarily choose your field of medicine. You kind of have to go where you can get in. And he got into rheumatology, and he became a rheumatologist, and he went into practice. And then after that, it was more about keeping his head above water, starting a practice, figuring out how the system worked, and the system was changing all the time. And he'd been running basically for maybe the first 10, 15 years of his practice. And after a while, things got more stable, and he was able to enjoy some of the benefits of that in this country. I didn't have that issue or that concern. I wasn't always concerned about where my next meal was coming from. As those who know me, I've had plenty of meals behind me. But it's one of these things where I have a different outlook on life because I'm not worrying about having to survive.
Right.
We have opportunities that present to us. And a lot of people are in a situation because when my dad went to school, there was no such thing as student loans, and he didn't know how that system worked. So you had to pay for it at the time you went to the school.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one of those things where you would not dare risk taking any chances on something that wasn't a guaranteed thing. Whereas we have the advantage now of debt. People feel this crushing weight of debt over time, but you have to realize that the debt is an opportunity that you can use or not use, and you'll pay it off slowly over time. And in medicine, you can always refinance or do something to make your debt serviceable, because the debt agencies want that money. They don't want you to go into default. So they want to help you get to the point where they make their money back and then some, right? So they want to string that out as long as it needs to be able to get their money back and get a return on the investment. So you have that opportunity here, whereas in previous generations, it wasn't always seen that way. Now we could go into the finances of that, but that's not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation is about choosing what you want to do and how much of your worth or life is medicine. So for my dad, his life isn't medicine. He likes medicine, but he loves traveling. Traveling is really what makes him happy.
Right.
Traveling the world, because when he was young, they were very, very poor, living in a third world country. And not quite abject poverty, but pretty bad. I haven't seen anyone as poor as my father was in this country, which is saying a lot, because I do a lot of volunteer work, and I work in a lot of underprivileged communities. And I still, even the homeless people in this country have more than my father had growing up, because there are places they can go to get free food, which is not the case in East Africa.
Right.
And so, worrying about having a meal at all is a concern, and not to minimize what people have in this country, but it's a level of fighting for survival that doesn't really exist here. And so, as a result, people have more opportunities in this country. America, for all of its warts, is, in my opinion, of all the places I've seen in the world, the most amazing country when it comes to opportunity. And as the son of an immigrant, I'm always going to say that. It's just something that people don't necessarily appreciate about this country. And you can have a job that doesn't constitute your net worth and who you are as a person, and just go to that job and enjoy that job for the 9 to 5 or whatever hours you're working, or in our case, 9 to 8:59 the next day. But it's fine to do that if you're willing to do it. But just realize that there are things outside of medicine that you can do to enjoy your life.
And what has kept you enjoying life besides the fact that you love what you do, which is initially, I think, the case in many doctors' situations?
Yeah, I just want to stay off that I picked objectively the best field of medicine without any bias of any kind. I'm a retinal surgeon. Retina is an amazing field of medicine. I really like it. You get to operate as a surgeon. You get to be a physician. You get to have chronic care. You get to have patients who you see just for a short period of time, then you never see again. And so you have the full gamut of that in retinal surgery. And it's very technology forward and very progressive in terms of always willing to try something new. And that was very appealing to me in particular. So I love retina. And I love it so much that I even started a retinal society with a few friends of mine that grew from 5 people to now we're over 700. And we have a constant chat on social media about different medical cases in retina and surgical cases in retina and how we approach it, different cases. And we talk about this all the time. On a given day, I'll have well over 1,000 text messages discussing things on these different chats. And we love it, and we have a really good time discussing our field, medicine. But all of us have something else that we also like to do in our spare time. I like woodworking. It's something that I like doing. I like working with my hands. So I like to build furniture. I wouldn't claim I'm very good at it, but I can enjoy doing it in my spare time when I have spare time. And usually I kind of batch things into different, I have a block of time this weekend, so I'll work on it this weekend. Then I won't look at it for several weeks because I'm busy, which is fine. but it gives me another outlet for just being able to sit down and do something. I do like to read a lot, so I read a lot of books. I find, I have a full variety of books I read, from something that's practical to educational to just sci-fi fantasy, books to kind of escape the world. And that's worth doing as well. I listen to a lot of podcasts. The Worthy Physicians, one I listen to every single time. I do a lot of things. I started my own company. We make augmented reality glasses to help people see better. If the medical treatment can't make them see at a certain point, that we need to help them technologically. So the name of that company is Idaptic. So I keep myself pretty busy. I also exercise. I like to swim. So I swim whenever I can. I live in California, so that time of swimming is basically year round if you heat the pool. And so I do that a lot. I went swimming last week.
And now you're stuck in what, sub-degree temperatures, self-inflicted?
Yes, I'm currently visiting the in-laws in the Midwest, and it is cold here. There's snow on the ground.
I will say it's the upper Midwest.
The upper Midwest.
The upper Midwest.
Upper Midwest. The kids did make a snowman yesterday, so then that was good.
That is fun. And so is this how you deal with stresses from work and life, or trying to find that work-life balance?
Work-life balance is an important thing. People don't understand this when they're in training, because there really isn't a work-life balance in training, and there really shouldn't be, in my opinion. If you want to have a work-life balance when you're in training, then you have agreed to increase the length of time for your training, because there's a certain amount of things you need to learn. And the only way you're going to learn it is by doing it and by reps.
Right.
And so if you want to get those reps in, if you want to have good training and be well prepared for when you're on your own, you need to put in the time, and you need to be able to do this. And what a lot of countries have done, because they've really limited the number of doctor hours, and there really aren't jobs for doctors because of their medical systems, they've extended the length of training. So in the UK, for example, ophthalmology is a 6-year residency. In the US, it's 1 year of internship and 3 years of ophthalmology. In Canada, it's 4 years of ophthalmology. They have a longer length of training. So different countries have longer lengths of training than they do in the US. And there's a cost to that. But while they're in training, it's not quite the level of work hours as it is in the US. And the US has gotten a lot better, right, in terms of the work hours.
Yes, they have.
Like duty hour restrictions are very serious. I'm in a residency program, and we do not let our residents go 1 minute over their duty hours. In ophthalmology, it's not really a problem, but even if it wasn't ophthalmology, this duty hour issue is something that's serious, right? Because we don't want people to make mistakes because they're tired.
Right.
Like, that doesn't make sense. But it's one of those things where there's always backup, and there has to be backup built into the system. And for people who are burnt out from their clinical practice because they've got into practice and they're working too many hours, that just means you need backup. And if you don't have backup, then something bad happens, right? A pilot would never tolerate not having backup.
Oh, no.
Right?
I mean, actually, they're very serious. Right. And they're even fed 2 separate meals.
Right.
Just to make sure that they both don't have food poisoning.
Right. And, the FAA has taken a very close look at this, and it's really important for them, because if they mess up, a lot of people die, right? Same thing happens in medicine on a smaller scale, because it's usually one person at a time, but that doesn't mean it's any less impactful for that one person.
Correct. I mean, we never want a bad outcome. Even though they happen, we try to put in as many stop signs or yield signs. That way we don't get to that point. So you have hobbies outside of medicine. And how did you cultivate that? Was it after you became an attending? Or was this something you had worked with even throughout medical school and throughout residency and fellowship.
So I've always been a big reader.
Right.
Even through college, I went to MIT for college, which was probably the busiest time of my life. And it was substantially harder than medical school, going to college at MIT. But I still read every single day because that's what was something important to me. It helped me relax, and it helped me kind of get out of my own head and give me basically a separate place other than the reality I was dealing with on a daily basis. And so, for me, it just meant I maybe missed my morning class, allegedly, or that I slept in a little bit, or maybe I got up early and I just had less hours of sleep that day. And I took a nap in the afternoon between classes, or maybe during a class, depending on the class. But
Amen
it
to
was
that.
one of those things. Say again?
I said amen to that.
Yeah, like I had to take statistics, man. I'm sorry. That was the most boring class in the history of the world.
Yes.
I once woke up in the middle of that class to look around, and I was the only person awake at that moment, including the TA.
Unfortunately, my statistics class was in the evening, and that was brutal.
Yeah, mine was right after lunch. That was really bad.
But I mean, obviously you made it through, and you've maintained your love of reading, and you've added to that when most people in our decade of life will actually start losing their identity, it seems. And I think it depends maybe which field of medicine, and I'm going to even go out and say it might even be more female than male. I think that does play into it on a personal level, not necessarily in medicine, but it also depends, I think, on which maybe geographical location. Whereas the coast might be a little bit more progressive, there still is a patriarchal system here in the Midwest, at least from what I've seen and from what I've observed.
My opinion about that, it may have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but I feel like the system you're dealing with is a system you've set up for yourself. Uh-huh. And so, my wife, I'm sure, would disagree. And she's a physician as well. And she works a half schedule in her clinical practice, and the rest of the half of her time is dealt with everything else. And she definitely understands that she has a larger portion of the domestic duties that I do, right? I have two jobs. I'm a full-time clinical faculty at the university, and I started my own company as well.
Right.
And so my time is very, very limited during business hours. It's really difficult. And so therefore she does have to take up the slack. But the thing is that her clinical practice is really important to her. And so she really wanted to make sure that she would be able to do that. She spent all those years in training and things. And so she wants to do that. And so it's a lot of stress for her, for sure. And some people I know, it's the flip side. A lot of my colleagues who are women are the heads of their divisions. And so their husbands have cut back their jobs to help take over the family. But the ladies do feel the need to be a mom, right? And being a mom is in and of itself a full-time job.
Right.
And so one of my colleagues, she cooks her dinner for her family every day. And she certainly complains about it to us. But I'm like, well, if you want, you can hire somebody to help out, and you can make your teenage children help out around the house as well.
Right.
And her claim is that, no, they're so spoiled, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, well, whose fault is that?
No, with that, I agree.
My 9-year-old helps my wife cook.
Yeah.
She's pretty good at it. It's one of these things where it just has more to do with how you raise the children and what level of work you're going to have them do. How coddled do you want them to be? And if you really want them to be that coddled, then that means you're going to have to either take it on yourself or hire some help. It's not always economically feasible for everybody to hire help, or in this environment right now, even finding anybody is hard to do. Right. But there has to be something, because you're not living to work, you're working to live, right? And that's important to consider.
I think that's a really important thing that you just said right there. Working to live, not living to work. Because there seems to be a culture in medicine where, at least here, this is who you are. This is everything in your life. I mean, it's like we're trying to be molded from day one of medical school into something that we're not. So it's many people do lose their identity in medicine. Medicine becomes their identity, almost like a superhero, like your shirt, which I love, by the way. But no, I agree. As far as life, drawing those boundaries and delegating. But it's also the system where, for example, in our medical school class, one of the assistant deans pulled the females aside and told us how to dress for the white coat ceremony. I didn't tell anything to the guys. It was just all women. That's not kosher. I mean, we all got here.
At my school, it was the opposite, because they knew the women knew how to dress and they knew the men were all sloppy. I'm not kidding. So they had to tell like half the guys in my class to go get a haircut. And they're like, you're wearing a shirt and tie, you are now a professional. As the minute you put the coat on, you have to do that. Not a single woman in my class was pulled aside.
Couldn't they have just presented that in a more neutral fashion? Because I mean, it can rub somebody the wrong way. I mean, what if somebody really likes their long hair? A man bun is acceptable. I don't care for them,
is it though? In medicine, is it though? Like in emergency room, maybe, and in surgery, you have a hat on, so no one really cares. But do you want your doctor to be unkempt? Like, you can have long hair if as long as it's kept clean.
Exactly.
Organized, right?
Exactly. So,
and in psychiatry, sure, I'm sure a lot of those guys have long hair. I'm going to
refrain from making any other comments because we could just go down that rabbit hole.
Stereotypes exist. For the most part, no one actually believes them, but they're funny to joke around about, right?
Absolutely.
But the point is, in this space, as long as they're not malicious, right? But it's a professional field, and so you should present yourself professionally.
Right.
What that means to you is going to be very specific to where you want to practice and how you want to run your practice, right? There are people who dress however they want to dress on a given basis. One of my doctors only wears his scrubs to clinic every single day, and he doesn't operate more than once a week. So why is he wearing scrubs 4 other days a week? Because that's comfortable for him. Great. That's fine. Right. Certainly now in the COVID world, a lot of people are wearing scrubs to work for different reasons, which is fine. My residents wear scrubs every day, which when I was in residency, I would do that as well. And that's fine. They're moving and they're working, and sometimes you get dirty doing that. And so that's totally fine. Mm-hmm. I had a colleague when I was in internship on rounds in the hospital. He would wear a polo shirt, khakis, and Van sneakers on rounds. And that's how he would work in the hospital during residency. And he's a very successful physician in private practice right now. Right. And I'm sure he wears exactly the same clothes. I've seen a couple of pictures of him on his website. And yeah, he's wearing the same polo shirt that he wore 15 years ago in residency. I'm pretty sure it's the exact same polo shirt. I don't think it's a new version of the same polo shirt. I think it's the same one. But he's a hospitalist, and so he enjoys his life like that. And that's fine. Right. And, I'm in California. I've definitely seen doctors wear flip-flops to the clinic. And it's all depends on the culture of where you're going to practice, right? But in my personal appearance, like there should be some level of professional attire and looking professional. And if the culture in your area prior to starting medical school is not of that, then people need to be educated of that. They can decide to do it in a less sexist way by telling everybody at the same time, which is fine.
Right.
But if they see a large issue in a specific group of people, sometimes they need to pull those people aside because they may not understand that you're talking to them in particular.
That's true. That's true. Unfortunately, that individual is still doing this, and 15, 17 years post my white coat ceremony. Now, what risk factors do you see for burnout? Because you've had training all over the country, and you work with residents and fellows.
Yeah, so there's a lot of risk factors for burnout. And we alluded to this before. And one of the risk factors for burnout was not having a life outside of medicine. When I started my intern year, the residency program director for internal medicine in Cincinnati was Eric Worm. He was a great guy. And he made sure to give us a lecture during our orientation about burnout. And he had a few rules that were important. One of them was that you have to have friends outside of medicine. If everybody you know is in medicine and all you talk about is medicine, then you'll feel very pigeonholed into this world. And that will feed into this feedback loop of this is who you are and not just what you do. And if it changes who you are, then you've already lost, right? So that's a very, very bad sign. That leads to some bad situations. So you need to have some interaction outside of medicine. Additionally, you need to have interests outside of medicine yourself, and that's a kind of a corollary to that. So for me, I like my woodworking. I listen to different types of podcasts, different types of news. I read different types of books, and these things are really interesting to me. And so I spend a lot of time on that kind of stuff. And for some people, it might be something as simple as gardening or going for walks outside or hiking, or if you're not an outdoorsy kind of person, maybe video games. It's fine. I have a lot of doctor friends who spend a lot of time on video games. As long as you're not an addict in those worlds, because that can be a different problem, as long as you do things in moderation, you can enjoy that. And sometimes that's helpful for you to be able to do that. Other risk factors for workout are not learning how to say no. You don't have to take on every single project. You don't have to go to every single meeting. Whenever I get invited to a meeting, my default answer is no, until you can convince me otherwise.
Right.
Because I have something else to do that matters to me more than this meeting.
Yeah.
One thing I'm very guilty of is checking my email outside of work hours, because I don't have time during work hours to actually check my email. By the time I check my email, I have 300 messages. Yeah. I read less than a fourth of them. I just delete them before I even read them most of the time. If it comes from certain people, I'll definitely read it. Like, obviously, if my chairman's emailing me, I'm going to read that email. But if it's from some marketer or someone tried to get my attention who I don't know, if it's from a LinkedIn request from someone I've never heard of, I just delete it. I don't even respond to it. I don't even bother going to reject it. I just delete it. It saves my time. Like, what's the point of that?
Right.
There's that book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Right.
And you look at the matrix of urgent and important. So there's a 2x2 box, four squares of urgent versus important. If something is urgent and important, you should take care of it.
Yeah.
If something is important but not urgent, you should get to it as soon as you finished the first box. If something is urgent and not important, you could get to it if you've gotten through everything else, but maybe not. If something's not urgent and not important, you should just completely ignore it, and you should never worry about it, because most of those things will take care of themselves. Most of the things in actually 3 of those 4 boxes will eventually take care of themselves.
Yes. No, I agree. I agree. It's about being efficient and knowing really where to spend your time.
Right, because time is the only truly limited resource there is.
Absolutely.
Right. the clock moves forward. Father Time has lost no battles. We've all have lost people too early in our lives that we've interacted with. And so this just goes to show you that, do you really want to spend this hour reading emails? Nobody on the deathbed ever said, I wish I spent more time reading emails.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a very, very true statement. And I think it was on my addiction rotation when one of the counselors really told me, and she goes, look in the mirror and practice saying no. It's going to save you a lot of time. And I have to tell you, that was a good rotation. It made me understand I did not want to do that type of medicine. And I appreciated that, but I did learn a lot of things about boundaries and about saying no. That was hard to apply maybe in residency, but has gotten a lot easier as I've gotten older and further into medicine, just because you're right, there are only 24 hours in a day. And so am I going to use that by working and letting that consume me? Or am I going to battle the two-headed or the two heathens upstairs? And I'd rather, they're great. They're great. And
they're cuties.
They, thank God they are, right? But focus has shifted, and it's just finding that nice balance. And I think, at least for me, I have a great work-life balance. And what's even the most fun about it is that I don't have to have an excuse to watch animated movies now. I can just, this is what we're going to do. And I have two partners right there. For me, that's great.
You never need an excuse to watch animated movies. They are awesome.
They are. It's taken me a couple of moves, and life has been like drinking from a fire hose. But the nice thing is that I'm in a place now where I can really make that work. You train residents and fellows. What advice do you give them about burnout, besides what we've already discussed?
The first and most important thing they need to understand is that they have value, and they have a skill set that is not easily found or available. I wouldn't have taken them. They wouldn't have gotten as far as they've gotten if they weren't qualified and competent, right? They're among the top people in the world in terms of intellect and hard work.
Mm-hmm.
With those two things, they should have enormous value, and they should value that. And so if they feel like their work is too much for them, imagine what it's like for someone who doesn't have their bandwidth, who doesn't have their skill set, their intelligence, and their work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, then it's not reasonable for a human to be able to do that.
Uh-huh.
So they need to fix that. And one of my friends from residency, Nasreem Ibrahim, wrote this great book called Spark Plug. You can find it on Amazon. It was a great book. It's really short, quick read, and I'm buying them all for my residents. They should be in the mail any minute now. And I give them these books. I want them to read books like this so they can understand that if they're having trouble and they're struggling, they're not alone. A lot of people have. A lot of us have. A lot of their mentors have gone through trials and tribulations of our own. I actually quit my fellowship to my program director's face because he was pissing me off. And my senior fellow had to drag me back, literally. And I tell people this, I'm like, it's hard, even for people like me who have gotten to the point where now I'm in charge.
Yeah.
Right? Now I'm the person pissing off my fellows like my fellowship director did to me, right? And I do thank him for the amazing education he gave me, and I still look up to him as a mentor, and I still get his advice on different things. But there was a point. I was a breaking point. It was difficult for me. My wife and my newborn daughter were in Cincinnati, and I was in New York, and it was hard. It was the only time in my life I'd ever lived alone. Was when I was in fellowship with a child, and that was only period of my life I've ever lived alone, because as a child I lived with my family, my parents and my brother, and then I went to college and I lived in a fraternity house with 50 of my friends, and then in graduate school I shared a house with 6 other people, and then in medical school I always had a roommate or two, and then in residency I was engaged and then married. And so I had my fiance/wife. And then I started fellowship after my daughter Simran was born. But my fellowship was in New York. My wife still had a year left of her fellowship in Cincinnati. So we were living halfway across the country from each other. And it was tough.
Yeah. And so everybody has their own breaking points. And it, I think people have to realize their boundaries. You realize yours. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to ask for help. It's hard. It's hard to ask for help at times. Mostly driven by the ego. Mm-hmm. But thank you for sharing that, because I mean, somebody could look at you and say that you've never struggled. You've never struggled. And quite frankly, that's not true, because you just shared a very vulnerable point in your life.
Life is struggle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the truth. It's not that easy. Some people, it seems like it's easy to other people. If your entire view of the world is what happens on Facebook and Instagram. But that's not what real life is. Everybody's real life involves struggle. Everybody is hurting at some level. Even insert famous celebrity here or whatever. Everybody struggled through something in their lives. It's just the way life is, and it's important to have backup. It can be backup from a work standpoint. It can be friends and family. It can be a religious community. It can be complete strangers. It can be a therapist. Now, therapy is so easy to get. There's so many apps you can go to that will sign you up with a therapist basically right away, and you can, through telemedicine, through your app, talk to a therapist. Just having somebody to talk to is valuable, and people should not be ashamed of that at all. And now that it's so accessible, they don't even have to know who you are as a person. You don't have to have any interaction with them other than the 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour you're going to spend with them on the phone, basically, if you want. Or you can physically go to see a therapist. That's okay. Sometimes insurance will cover it. It's supposed to, but it doesn't always. And sometimes you have to pay for it out of pocket. But if it's for your own sanity, it's money well spent. It's an investment. Right?
It's an investment in the self.
Yeah, people spend a lot of money going to the gym. It's the same thing.
Right.
If you're spending your money on a personal trainer, this is a personal trainer for your mind and your soul. Right? And you don't have to pay the money to do a therapist if you don't want to. You can just have a friend to talk to. Just the other day I was talking to someone who's having some difficult life decisions they had to make, and I just talked to them. Mm-hmm. You just talk to somebody first. Sometimes people just need to get something off their chest, and that in and of itself is therapeutic.
Absolutely it is. And if somebody is struggling, just because you see other people that they're not outwardly struggling, doesn't mean squat. Like you said, people struggle. I think a lot of it is just how we are taught, or how we learn, how we condition ourselves to handle it.
And this is why people need to understand, and there's been a recent lack of civility in the public sphere. I look at people who are being rude or just causing a ruckus as somebody who's hurting. They're struggling. There's some reason why they're acting like this. Mm-hmm. Most people are not inherently bad. They're not evil.
Right.
But you don't know what struggles they've gone through in their lives. And so having a little bit of compassion goes a long way, and it doesn't cost anything to be compassionate and to be nice. Another thing I do to help myself get over the struggles and frustrations of my daily life is I go and I volunteer. I spend a lot of time volunteering. And when I do this, I see people who have struggles that I have never dealt with. Just being there for them and seeing how appreciative they are for the fact that you're willing to take time out of your day to help them. That's very fulfilling, and that really does make you feel better as a person.
Right.
One of my former students, whenever he has had a tough day of call or a really stressful week, he'll make a big pot of soup, fill up all of his Tupperware containers, and go out to an hopeless encampment and just hand out soup to people. And that makes him feel better as a person. It recharges him.
Sure.
That doesn't mean that's what you have to do, but that's just another option.
I think it kind of goes back to giving. What you put out, you'll receive back. We spend so much time focusing on our patients in healthcare. We forget to take care of ourselves, and self-care, you have to recharge. So that's awesome that that's what he does, and you do what you do. Why do you think so many physicians experience burnout before and during the pandemic? I guess let's start out with before the pandemic. Why were so many physicians burned out before COVID-19 even happened?
My opinion about this has a lot to do with the general concept of capitalism and consumerism and keeping up with the Joneses.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to blame everything in the world on social media, but I want to blame it on perceptions of what people think is normal. And there's a historical bad joke about how, if you want to make a lot of money in the stock market, find out what a doctor's doing and do the opposite. Because physicians historically have done a terrible job managing money in general, because they feel that they deserve the lifestyle of the rich and famous because they have a high income. Mm-hmm. But they don't think about the concept that they started later than everybody else, and they had all this debt to begin with. And right. So it's very tempting to go out and buy a Ferrari. My opinion is that if you buy a Ferrari as a physician, I don't care if you're making $10 million a year. What's the point of that? There's no point in that. You're just being silly. And that's fine if that makes you happy, but just realize there are consequences to the decisions you're making, right? Does that mean that, you bought a Ferrari, you could drive fast and get a speeding ticket? I can drive just as fast in my Toyota Tercel as you can in your Ferrari before I get a speeding ticket, right? Like if you take it to the track, that's one thing, right? But, on the 5 freeway, the speed limit's 65 miles an hour. And yeah, sometimes I may allegedly drive a little faster than that, but I'm never going to use 500, 600 horsepower. There's just no reason for me to do that.
No.
Now, I don't actually drive a Toyota Tercel anymore because I wouldn't physically fit in one, but it's just an example. The point is that really, you want to do what you're going to do with the money you have, but there's no reason to just blow your money on silly things. And so a lot of people have been doing that. They've been spending a lot of their money on stuff. And there's been a recent push towards paying for experiences and time with your family, which I do ascribe to that I would rather have experiences with my family rather than having stuff. And so I do try to do that more when I go traveling with my family and things like that. But even then, within reason, I'm not staying at the fanciest hotels all the time. I'm not getting a limousine to go anywhere. I still don't fly first class. I just don't see the need to. Yeah, I do buy the extra legroom seats because I'm a big guy, because I physically need it. But other than that, that's my thing. I still try to carry on my bag so I don't have to pay the check bag fees. And I make a good income. I don't have to do those things. I just don't see the value to me to doing those things.
Right.
And before the pandemic, everybody was trying to fly first class and have the most expensive cars and have the biggest houses. And so they had all of this money they were making that they're just going right out the door. And they also have this giant wad of med school debt they still have to pay off. And then they have this mortgage. And so they're on this rat race, and they're just running on the hamster wheel as fast as they can, to mix metaphors. And you can't constantly be running all the time and not get exhausted.
Sure.
That's just not possible. And that was the problem before. And it didn't help that private equity was getting into medicine, and hospitals were trying to just look at the bottom line, and medicine has become a for-profit enterprise where hospitals are running, if they're not running at absolute full capacity at all times, the admins and the business people feel like they're being inefficient, and so they cut resources to save costs. And so when you have an actual crisis, you don't have the ability to expand into the crisis. And the pandemic really made a lot of these things very obvious to the world that, hey, the American system does not have enough redundancy built into it to be able to handle the stresses of an actual catastrophe.
Right.
That's going to affect the entire country at one time. They can do it if it's affecting one area of the country, like a natural disaster. But if something affects the entire country at the same time, you don't have the flexibility to handle this because they run medicine such that it needs to be running at full capacity at all times to make the system work. And even though the government tried to give physicians support by giving them a certain percentage of the Medicare collections the year before, if you work for a hospital, the hospital just took that money. They didn't give me 1 cent of it. I got nothing from it. So my income went down 20% in 2020 from the year before. So, and theoretically, my practice should be expanding. I should be making more money every year, and still, because I'm not at a steady state yet. And so that was just the way the system was designed to run. And this is in academia, where theoretically that shouldn't even be the case, right? It should be based on the need from society, because I work for a state medical center, and so it should have the support of the government to take care of the indigent and the uninsured or underinsured. So it shouldn't affect my bottom line much at all. But it did, and that's like a small problem to compare to what people were actually going through. So I'm not complaining about that, but that's just the way the system has been designed. And so for a lot of people, that's been a huge source of stress. A lot of people don't have a lifestyle that can handle a 20% cut in pay,
right?
Because their expenses are so high.
Actually,
I try not to do that.
Right. And even though you came, but I think, would you say that your father being an immigrant and your mother as well, and that's how we're connected. Would you say that having that background has also shaped your outlook on life financially?
Absolutely. For people who've actually seen real poverty, you don't ever want to have to experience that. You certainly don't want your children to have to experience that. And so you're always going to keep a large reserve for that reason. And you're going to try to save money as much as you can, because it could be the difference between life and death.
Sure.
And so if you're having that in the back of your mind at all times, that colors everything you do. It really does. That doesn't mean I can't have nice things. I do have nice things. I think my house is nice. I think I live a comfortable lifestyle. I try not to go overboard, but it doesn't mean if my kid wants ice cream, I don't get ice cream, right?
Right.
It's
They're
fine.
just not going to have gold flakes, but it's going to be ice cream.
Exactly, right? Like there's no reason for them to eat gold, right?
Right.
And so they're not the Lannisters, right? They're just children, and children are just as happy about a cardboard box that you cut windows into, and now that's a car they can run around in, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, the University of Kansas School of Medicine, Wichita, actually sent out a survey for burnout, and interestingly, the first year was a pay cut. That was one of the biggest factors of burnout, was a pay cut. And somebody turned to me and said, why? And I don't know if this has actually been published. I'll have to talk to the author. But they said, well, if you look at it, they're being asked to work more, longer hours. There's no backup. So they're putting themselves out there. And this was at the beginning of the pandemic, mind you. So number one, they're working more, they're getting paid less. but their debt doesn't necessarily go away. So and these are very practical, very Midwestern physicians that I know personally. Either they were mentors or we trained together, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is a big, I think initially that was one of the biggest things. And I think now 2 years into it, I think we look at it and the fact that venture capitalists have come into medicine and we put the almighty dollar before patients and before workers. And we all know that simple business models have shown that if you put the human first, they'll make you even more productive.
Right. We're not robots.
No.
Right? We're humans, and we're humans taking care of humans. And so part of the reason why a pay cut hurts so much is because you're telling the physician that you value them less. And so my opinion about that is that if you're in a situation like that, you should leave. Let them deal with it. It's not your problem. And tell your patients to come with you. And it's not always feasible to do that, I know, but at some point the system has to break for things to actually make change. And so it's only going to happen if there's really large scale changes. In Europe, it's common for physicians to go on strike. Like that's actually incredibly common. That doesn't happen in the United States. And it's because people feel obliged to their patients, which they should, but at the cost of what?
Exactly.
And, you're just letting the system die by 1,000 paper cuts instead of letting it see that there's a real problem and taking care of people with the priority is that the people you're taking care of aren't just patients. There's also your physicians. They're also your nurses. There's also all your staff. We're having a very difficult time keeping staff because it's very stressful. And then every time it's stressful, now one more person leaves, and now the previous people take up the slack for the one person who left. Now it's even harder for everybody else who's left behind, and it goes down this downward spiral. And the only way you can actually change that is by leadership. And with leadership, and this is why it's important to have good leadership, and it's important to make sure your leaders are worthy of the title that they have, is that they will make you want to be there, right? They care about you as a person. And when you work for someone who cares about you as a person, the fact that you make a little less might not matter as much.
Right.
Is if you have enough to survive and comfortably, then if you make a little bit less, but you're happier, it's worth it. Why do you think I'm in academia? I could make a lot more money in private practice right next door. California doesn't have non-compete clauses. I could literally open up shop down the street from my eye institute. And I've had friends do that, leave whatever group they were in and open up shop very close by, sometimes in the same building as their previous practice, and able to do that. The reason I don't is because of community, and I have the community that I really like in my department. My chairman has my back, and I'm 100% certain of that. And if he didn't, then I wouldn't feel obliged to put in the time and effort that I do.
Right.
Uncompensated time, being on all these committees, being the fellowship director, and doing all the things that I think are important to keep my place as desirable of a place to be. I've appointed myself the wellness czar of my department. And I told him, like, I'm the wellness czar.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that. I love that.
So when I started, we had a different chairman at the time who's since passed, but he was a great guy, Roger Steinert. And I would have these get-togethers. All started from when I was in residency. One of my attendings, Joshua Sands, decided to put some money he was making from working at one of these clinics. He's like, I'll donate my entire salary towards once a month, the residents all getting together with the faculty and just having a meal and a beverage at this German beer garden next to the VA hospital. And it was called the Monthly Topical Forum. And the chairman would come and he'd check in with all the residents, make sure we were all doing okay, if there's any issues we need to deal with. And he would have a pad and paper, and he'd be writing notes the whole time with the beer in front of him. And that made him a happy guy. And life was good. And I thought that was an amazing thing that Dr. Sands had set up. And so I wanted to continue that in my career here. And so I started that, and we called it the Monthly Topical Forum, also known as Whiskey Rounds, because there was a really good pub off campus that served only American beverages, including whiskeys. And so it had all these American whiskeys, and I like American whiskey. And so we had whiskey rounds. And it was interesting. We'd have these meetings, and I was the only person who drank. I had friends who were Mormons and ones who were Muslim, and none of these people drank alcohol. So they would have their sodas or juices or teas or whatever, and we'd have a beverage, and we'd talk about whatever we wanted to talk about. And it didn't have to be clinical or medical in nature. It was about whatever. How's life going? How's your family? What's new? What's going on? And that's become a thing. So after I invited the chairman, and he finally started coming to these things, and he's like, you're the social chair of our department. I'm like, are you going to make it an appointed position? He's like, sure, you'll get $0 extra salary. Sounds like a good deal for me, I said. So I signed up to be the social chair. And then burnout was starting to become an issue. People were complaining about it in the university. And so the university started this whole wellness program where they would have different, going out. Like people could go kayaking, they'd go hiking, and the university would kind of set up these meetings, and people would do that just so people would have an outlet outside of their clinical duties. And I thought that was really smart that the university was doing that. And so whenever I saw these opportunities, I would send emails out to the faculty. And then the next chairman said, hey, we need somebody who's in charge of wellness. I'm like, well, I'm already the social chair. He's like, how about this? You've now been promoted to wellness czar. I like the sound of czar. So I became the wellness czar. So now it is, instead of whiskey rounds, it's the monthly faculty development and wellness conference held offsite, outdoors because it's a pandemic.
Sure.
So there's good airflow. And we have those. And so those are good. And so, California has been very strict about their regulations due to the pandemic, which makes sense. But we're all vaccinated and boosted, and we're sitting outside in places with good airflow. And so, it works out pretty well. And so we have these, and, I haven't really been able to do it every month during the pandemic, but doing every other month, basically. And people enjoy it. And it's a good place to de-stress. And sometimes you just need to complain. Sometimes you just need a place to complain, and that's okay.
No, I do. What actually made me start this podcast was the suicide of my best friend, and it was funny because we used to have a senior meeting. There were about 3 or 4 of us. We'd have a quote unquote senior meeting, and it was kind of quite frankly, a bitching session over alcohol. It was very cathartic. And then life happened, and some could cope better than others, and there are multiple factors behind what happened. But I think going back to the senior meetings is what we used to call them, very cathartic. And it's, I think it's needed because as we're social beings, we have these different realms of life. And when you look at it, it is a work family. It is a work family, and you need to clear the air. You need to build those bridges. And you were discussing earlier about seeing a therapist or talking to a friend. Letting it out is therapeutic. And that's exactly the form that you've presented. So I think that's very well done.
Yeah, it's helpful to have, pitching sessions and whatever stage of your career you are.
Yeah.
We always had that in residency. And our chairman has ethics conferences once a month with the residents, and before that they have the program director meet up with them, and they have a monthly bitching session, which is great. It's important for the residents to be able to do that and trainees to be able to do that. And even when you're in practice, it's important to have somebody to do that with.
Right.
And this is a good thing to do. Some people, what they'll do is they'll play golf, and they'll do it on the golf course, which is fine. If you don't
Yeah.
like golf, then some people do it on a walk, on a hike. You just need to have an interaction with another human. People are social creatures,
Right.
and there's a need for human interaction. And the pandemic, a lot of people have been so afraid of getting sick, and every day, all day long, they're dealing with people who are sick and dying of COVID, that it puts them in this very, very scared mentality. They don't want to interact with other humans, and there's a cost to that. I don't want to minimize COVID itself as a disease, because I've lost patients. We all have, and it was very sad, and it's a terrible thing, but that doesn't mean there's not a cost to it. So it's a pandemic, not of coronavirus 2019. It's also the pandemic is also affecting how humans interact with each other, and people are starting to realize that, and they're starting to find other methods. A lot of people were using Zoom. They're having these Zoom happy hours, and that was big for a while. But sometimes you just need to talk to someone on the phone. You can just call them. That technology has existed for a long time.
Right.
Sometimes you just
Right.
need to go for a walk. You just need to go outside. And, we now know that, if you're in a well-ventilated place, there's very little transmission. And now most people are vaccinated. I wish everyone was vaccinated, but unfortunately, there's a lot of people who don't understand that. And in my hospital, more than 90% of the patients with COVID who are admitted are unvaccinated, in a community with 80% vaccination. So that 20% of the population who refuses to get vaccinated makes up more than 90% of the hospital admissions.
Mm-hmm.
And that should explain it to anybody who doesn't want to believe in the safety of vaccines, that this is a disease that's largely preventable
Mm-hmm.
in a severe way. And it's up to you to take care of yourself and your family. And 1 in 4 people who die of COVID leave behind children who are minors. So just think about that. If you have kids, do you want to leave them without a parent?
Right. Those are high stakes. So what would you say to the listeners here? What would be your clinical pearls, or your take-home message or messages?
So one of the reasons why I wanted to be on this podcast was, I hear a lot of people who've been struggling, and there's a lot of options out there about how dire the situation is in medicine. And I'm not saying that's not, but also the fact that medicine's amazing, and it's a wonderful field to be in. What other job is there where you can make a really comfortable living? I'm not saying you're going to be, a Wall Street billionaire, but you can have a very comfortable life. And on a day-to-day basis, you take care of people and you make their lives better. You're not stealing or robbing from somebody. You're not cheating anybody. You're helping people live their lives to the best of their abilities, and to be able to enjoy time with their family in a comfortable, healthy way. And in my case, be able to see their family. What else can you do that does that? There aren't many other jobs that have that benefit of being able to help your soul while you're working. And medicine can do that if you set it up right. So my advice is to have everybody look at their practice and see if it does that. If it doesn't do that, something's wrong and you need to fix it. And all of these things are fixable. You just need to approach it with an analytical mind and set it up such that your work life is supporting your life goals. And life goals isn't just financial independence, retire early. That's one of these new topics that's really big, is trying to make enough money and become financially independent and retire early. I don't want to retire. I don't want to retire at all. I want to work until the day I die. I love my job. I really do.
Right.
And I want to physically take care of people for as long as I can actually do it. Because I love my field of medicine. I spent a lot of time and effort getting to the point where I could feel comfortable taking care of humans and taking care of their vision. And it's not something I want to give up. And I don't care if I'm financially independent. I don't want to retire early. It's just one of those things that if I really wanted to, I could move to a third world country with the amount of money I have and live for the rest of my life very comfortably. I don't want to do that. I want to stay where I am and do the job I'm doing now. I like it. And if you aren't in a situation like that, then maybe you should look for a situation like that.
So do you, no, I have a very similar outlook, and I think everybody that has come on the podcast has done that. From Dr. Hampton, who can wear tutus to work, and that really is who she is. To Dr. Shalev, who has been able to go non-clinical with medical devices, and everybody has figured out their own way, and maybe people have different breaking points. But when I had talked to Dr. Bean on the earlier part of the podcast when audio was not as great, and I sincerely apologize for that. One thing that he did say, and that I think you try to do, and I try to do, is to quarterly reevaluations. Every business has a quarterly evaluation. How am I doing on an emotional level? How am I doing on a spiritual level? And is my place where I'm at in all realms, all those boxes, play box, work box, family, etc., are those all balanced? And when they're not, I can definitely tell, and I do have to scale back. I will tell you that in medicine, you get a lot of criticism for cutting back or switching, because it's looked at, oh, you can't make a decision. I don't see that. I don't see it like that at all. And I really do see it as exactly the way you said, making medicine fit my needs in life. How do you develop that insight? How did you keep hold of that insight, or how did you develop that?
So part of it is making the right decision to begin with and looking at what's available to you now and not making the change unless you really feel like this next opportunity is going to be what you want it to be. And so my one criticism of the concept of switching all the time is that maybe the reason you're switching all the time is because you didn't make the right decision to begin with. And maybe you jumped in with both feet when you should not have. And you should have been a little more timid about going all in and maybe testing the waters before completely changing your whole life towards something. You don't have to do everything 100% all the time. One of the things Dr. Shalev was mentioning in her podcast was how she put in the time and effort and started slow with her investing in real estate. And by doing that, and now she offers this great opportunity. I don't know if you've checked out her website. I watched her webinar. It was really good about how to start with smaller investing, and you don't have to make it your whole life to do that. The same concept applies to anything, even a job. Before you completely move your whole family across the country to a new job, you got to make sure that's the right job and that setup is going to work out well for you. If it's not, then you've moved your whole family for what? And so you have to keep an outlook as to what your end goals are. So always approach every opportunity with the end goal in mind and how you want your day to run. It's not all financially driven. There's more things to life than the money you're making. And so things like that you have to really consider. And the way I've been able to realize this was watching a lot of my friends be unhappy with their first jobs, and sometimes second jobs, and sometimes third jobs. People in medicine, they've been in practice for less than 10 years. And if you're on your fourth job in less than 10 years, either something major changed, or maybe you didn't make the best decision when you picked the second and third job. You can always be forgiven for having a bad first job right out of training, right? At that point, you've been running, you've been making a resident or fellow salary, and so somebody's offering you what to you was an ungodly amount of money for the first time in your life, and you're just going to take it, and you're not going to see the whole forest for the trees. And so that's understandable, but after the learning you've had from that first job, it should give you a better outlook when you're choosing your second job. Some of us are lucky enough that our first job was great for us, and I'm very, very pleased that my job has been like that. But my eyes are always open. That doesn't mean that the facts on the ground aren't going to change. They might, and they might have to change everything. And the way we get paid might change. They may change at some point to a single payer system, which would change everything. All of these things could come, and they could come relatively fast, and you might have to be agile. There's a really good book called Who Moved My Cheese? If you haven't read it, you should read it. You'll be able to read it in like an hour. But it's a great concept in that staying agile and always being ready to change what you need to do to keep yourself moving, and keep yourself prepared for the next stage of your life is a good skill to have. And so getting too complacent in your life is a guaranteed way to, at some point in your life, struggle, because you're not prepared for the changes that are going to happen, because changes always happen.
Right. That's a very good point. And so the name of the book is Who Moved My Cheese? Is that correct?
I'm forgetting the author's name. I want to say it's Spencer.
So before we close, I really like the references to the books. I'm always looking for a way to expand knowledge, etc. And you've always had a good selection of reading material. So do you mind giving us the names and authors before closing?
Sure. I'm going to start with the book I just mentioned, Who Moved My Cheese, by Spencer Johnson, MD. This was the book that's about always staying agile. Then one of the more recent books I read was a book by a co-resident of mine called Spark Plug. Her name is Nasreen Ibrahim, Nasrien, last name Ibrahim. She's a cardiologist. She's great, and her book is really good for people who are experiencing burnout and stress in life in general. It doesn't have to be in medicine; it can be in anything. It's a quick read. It's a great book. Another good book that's more about finances is a book called The White Coat Investor by James Dahle, Dahle. He has a great website as well, White Coat Investor. Just search Google for it, and it's a good resource on how to set up your financial life, because this is something that isn't really talked about in a lot of residency programs. I do try to teach my residents about finances and about how to not have to worry about money no matter what level of income they have. The first book that I read in finance that was really valuable to me was given to me by my uncle, Deepak Shah. And this book is called The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clason, Clason. This is a book written in the 20s, I want to say, and it's probably the best investing book and personal finance book I've ever read, because things haven't really changed in 100 years. And it's a really good book, The Richest Man in Babylon. And then another book that I really like is another book I read recently. It's called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, Sinek. He's known for one of these TED Talks he gave a long time ago about leadership. And he's a big motivational speaker in the world of executive leadership and how to run a business.
Mm-hmm.
And his general purpose is that the world that people live in, their lives, are a game with no endpoint, right? You can't win at marriage, right? You can't win at life. The purpose of the infinite game is just to keep the game going. It's not to win the game. This is not a winnable game. And so it's the journey that matters. And so he does a really good job of explaining that in this book. So these are books that I highly recommend to everybody. You know, most of them are relatively short and they don't take a lot of time to read. I buy these books physical, hard copy, even though I'm a big proponent of the Kindle. One of my college frat buddies was one of the developers of the Kindle. So I obviously own more than one. Got to support your friends, right? But I physically like books. I like having actual pages. And the nice thing about having an actual book is that it doesn't take any batteries to run a book.
Sure.
You can use your book wherever you are, whenever you are. Just have a little light and you'll be fine.
No, I appreciate that. And I really appreciate you taking your time, especially on vacation. And I have always appreciated and respected your insight. So thank you. Thank you very much for coming on here.
Thanks, Sapna.
Thank you for joining us today. This concludes the podcast. Subscribe, tell a friend, follow us at www.theworthyphysician.com. Remember, you are worthy, you are human. Take care.
Second time